They sent her as a joke. The ugly daughter, the awkward one, the invisible one, an insult disguised as a diplomatic gift. Barbara never imagined she'd be chosen for anything, let alone to meet one of the most powerful men in the world. But when their eyes met for the first time, something changed. He didn't laugh at her appearance. He saw something no one had ever seen before. And that changed everything. This is the story of how a family's rejection became fate's greatest gift. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and become a member to get early access to upcoming stories. And if you felt it was really worth listening to, also click the "Totally Worth It" button. Your gesture makes all the difference and helps us keep bringing stories that move people. Barbara had always known she was invisible. Not the romantic kind, the mysterious type that sparks curiosity. It was the heavy, suffocating kind of invisibility, the kind that makes you disappear even when you're in the same room. While her half-sister, Savannah, sparkled like a polished diamond under spotlights, Barbara was the forgotten shadow in the corner. Dull brown hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, thick-framed glasses sliding down her nose, baggy clothes that seemed to want to hide her even more from the world. The house where she grew up smelled of expensive perfume and ambition. Her stepmother, Victoria, commanded every room like a queen without a crown, deciding who deserved attention, who deserved love, who deserved to exist. And Barbara deserved silence, deserved to be forgotten, deserved the leftovers. Savannah was everything Barbara wasn't. Blonde, tall, with curves that defied gravity, and a smile that looked like it belonged on magazine covers. She knew it, and so did Victoria. Together, they formed a cruel alliance, a duo that turned every dinner into a parade of subtle humiliations. "Barbara, dear, you're not going to eat that, are you?" Victoria would ask, watching Barbara's plate with eyes as sharp as blades. "You already have, how should I put it, enough structure." Discreet laughter. Savannah would cover her mouth with her hand, pretending to be polite, but her eyes gleamed with pleasure. Barbara would swallow hard, lower her head, and push the plate away. Her stomach growled, but her pride hurt more. Her only refuge was books, stacks of them scattered around the cramped little room at the end of the hall, the smallest in the house, of course. She got lost in stories of brave heroines, impossible loves, happy endings that seemed as distant from her reality as the moon. At night, when the house finally fell silent, Barbara would turn on the small lamp beside her bed and read until her eyes burned. There on those yellowed pages, she wasn't the ugly daughter, she was free. But then everything changed. An envelope arrived. Not an ordinary envelope. It was heavy, cream-colored, with a golden seal that reflected the sunlight like something from another century. Victoria held it between her fingers as if it were sacred, her eyes gleaming with greed. "It's from him," she whispered, almost breathless. Christopher Vallemont. The name echoed through the dining room like silent thunder. Even Barbara, hidden behind the book she was pretending to read, felt the weight of those words. Christopher Vallemont. The heir of Vallemont, a region between the Arab desert and technological modernity, where tradition and innovation coexisted like magic. He was a billionaire, influential, mysterious, and he was looking for a wife, not just any wife. The invitation was clear. He was seeking someone with true values, someone who could see beyond luxury, someone who understood responsibility, compassion, simplicity. Beautiful words, words that made Victoria smile like a snake about to strike. "Savannah," she called, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. "You're going to Vallemont." Savannah burst into smiles, clapping her hands like a child. Barbara watched, motionless, her heart tightening in a way she couldn't name. It wasn't envy. It was loneliness, the certainty that she would never be chosen for anything. But then, 3 days before the trip, Savannah disappeared. It was Barbara who saw her through the window, running away in the middle of the night with a pink suitcase and a man in a red sports car, a professional poker player, famous for his debts and his empty charm. Savannah had chosen cheap thrills over the golden opportunity. And Victoria. Victoria panicked. "We're going to lose everything," she screamed, pacing back and forth across the room, her perfectly painted nails scratching at the fabric of the sofa. "Vallemont will destroy us if we don't send someone. He'll see us as disrespectful, unworthy. That's when her eyes landed on Barbara, and Barbara felt her blood run cold. "No," she whispered, instinctively backing away. "No, I can't." "You will," Victoria cut her off, her voice cold, final. "You will. Because we have no choice." But there was something in Victoria's eyes, something cruel, something calculated. It wasn't desperation. It was amusement. Barbara realized in that horrible moment that this wasn't a plan B. It was a premeditated insult. Mockery disguised as diplomacy. "Imagine his face when you arrive," Victoria laughed, a low, venomous laugh. "The ugly daughter, the awkward one, with your ridiculous glasses and your thrift store clothes. We'll show Christopher Valmont what we think of his pretentious request." Barbara's father, a weak man who had long ago sold his soul to Victoria, simply looked away, said nothing, didn't defend her, never did. 2 days later, Barbara was at the airport, alone, without Savannah, without Victoria, without anyone, just her, an old suitcase, and a first-class ticket that felt like a cruel joke. People looked at her with curiosity. What was this ordinary girl doing in the executive class line? She adjusted her glasses, pulled her coat closer to her body, and tried to make herself even smaller. Fear was coiled in her stomach like a serpent. Fear of failing, fear of being ridiculed, fear of confirming everything they'd always said about her. But there was something else, something small, fragile, pulsing weakly at the bottom of her chest. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, away from Victoria, away from Savannah, away from everything that suffocated her. Maybe she could breathe. Maybe, for the first time in her life, someone would see her, really see her. The plane took off. Barbara closed her eyes, her hands gripping the armrests. Down below, her old life was getting smaller and smaller, and ahead, the unknown was waiting. Christopher Valmont was waiting. And Barbara had no idea she was about to set fire to the heart of the man everyone thought was unreachable. The desert heat hit Barbara like a physical wave the moment she stepped off the plane. It wasn't just hot, it was dense, enveloping, almost alive. The air smelled of spices she couldn't name, mixed with hot sand and something floral, exotic, that made her senses spin. She blinked against the golden light of the setting sun, adjusting her glasses that were already sliding down her sweaty nose. Before her, Valmont rose like something out of a fevered dream. The palace, because there was no other word to describe it, was an impossible fusion of Arab tradition and futuristic architecture. Towers white as snow contrasted with golden domes that gleamed under the orange sky. Hanging gardens cascaded flowers down marble balconies. Fountains sang softly, and in the distance the desert dunes stretched infinitely, undulating like an ocean frozen in time. Barbara swallowed hard. Her fingers gripped the handle of her old suitcase, conscious of how miserable it looked in this fairy tale setting. She wore a simple navy blue cotton dress, the best she had, but still plain, dull. Her hair was pulled back in a bun that was already falling apart, rebellious strands sticking to her sweaty neck. "Miss Barbara?" She turned abruptly and nearly dropped her suitcase. A tall man dressed in impeccable traditional clothing was watching her with a gentle expression. He bowed slightly. "I'm Rashid, Mr. Valmont's personal assistant. Welcome. Please come with me." His voice was soft, respectful. Nothing in his posture suggested judgment. Still, Barbara felt the flush rising up her neck. She nodded, unable to find words, and followed him. The palace corridors were endless. Polished marble floors reflected the light from crystal chandeliers that seemed to float in the air. Ancient tapestries covered white walls, telling stories embroidered in gold and silver threads. The sound of Barbara's footsteps echoed, amplified by the reverent silence of the place. She tried not to look at the servants who passed by, all impeccably dressed, all with serene, expressionless faces. She didn't belong here. That became clearer with every step. Finally, Rashid stopped before a double door of carved wood. "These will be your quarters, Miss Barbara." He opened the doors. Barbara froze. The room was bigger than the entire house where she'd grown up. The ceiling was incredibly high, decorated with delicate frescoes of stars and moons. An enormous bed covered with ivory-colored silk sheets dominated the center. There was a balcony, an entire balcony, that overlooked the gardens and the desert beyond. Translucent curtains danced gently with the breeze that entered, carrying the scent of jasmine and roses. Barbara began, her voice failing. "Are you sure this is it?" Rashid smiled gently. "Absolutely, miss. Mr. Valmont personally insisted that you stay in the guest of honor quarters. If you need anything, there's a bell beside the bed. Someone will come immediately." He bowed again and left, closing the doors softly behind him. Barbara was alone. She let her suitcase fall to the floor and walked slowly to the balcony, her fingers trembling as they touched the smooth stone balustrade. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange, pink, and purple. The desert seemed infinite, the dunes changing color every second as if they were alive. It was beautiful, frightening, unreal. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying not to cry. What was she doing here? What was Victoria's plan? Wait for Christopher Valmont to see her, laugh at her, and send her away as proof of disrespect? Turn her into an anecdote to be told at elegant dinners? Barbara rubbed her arms, suddenly feeling cold despite the heat. "Are you okay?" She spun around so fast she tripped over her own legs. Her hip hit the balustrade, and she stumbled forward, her glasses flying off her face. Her arms flailed, trying to find balance, but gravity was relentless. She fell, but not to the ground. Strong hands caught her by the shoulders, firm but gentle, keeping her from collapsing completely. Barbara gasped, her heart racing, suddenly aware of the warmth of another person, the scent of sandalwood, and something woody, masculine. Hey, easy!" The voice was deep, amused. "I wasn't expecting such a dramatic reception." Barbara looked up and forgot to breathe. Christopher Valmont was there, standing right in front of her, holding her as if she was something fragile and precious. He was different from what she'd imagined. He wasn't wearing traditional clothes, but a white linen shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, simple dark pants. His black hair was slightly tousled, as if he'd run his hand through it absent-mindedly, and his eyes. His eyes were dark brown, almost golden in the sunset light, and they were fixed on her. Really, on her. Not through her. Not over her. On her. I'm sorry," Barbara stammered, trying to pull away but realizing she was still holding onto his arms to keep her balance. "I didn't. You startled me, and I saw," he replied, and then, to her complete shock, he laughed. It wasn't a mocking laugh. It was genuine, warm, the kind of laugh that makes your chest vibrate and your eyes sparkle. He bent down, picked up her glasses from the floor, and carefully cleaned them on his own shirt before returning them. "Your glasses, Miss Barbara." His fingers brushed hers when she took the glasses back. It was a brief touch, accidental, but Barbara felt it like an electric current running up her arm. She put the glasses back on, her hands shaking, and finally managed to take a step back. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice almost inaudible. Christopher tilted his head, studying her with a curiosity that didn't seem invasive. It seemed interested. "You're shyer than I expected." Barbara blinked. "You were expecting something?" "I was expecting someone," he said simply. "And you're here. That's already more than I expected." There was something in the way he spoke. It wasn't flirtation. It wasn't empty formality. It was sincerity, raw and disarming. Barbara began, not knowing what to say. "I shouldn't be here." "No? No. My sister, she was the one who was supposed to come. She's beautiful, confident, everything I'm not." Christopher was silent for a moment, his eyes still fixed on her. Then slowly he took a step forward. Barbara held her breath, but he simply rested his hands on the balustrade beside her, looking out at the desert. "You know what I see when I look at the desert?" he asked softly. Barbara shook her head. "I see something most people think is empty, lifeless. But if you really look, you'll realize it's full of beauty. Dunes that change shape. Stars that only shine when the darkness is complete. Life hidden where no one expects it." He turned his face to her, and smiled. Sometimes, Miss Barbara, what seems wrong is exactly what was right all along. Barbara felt her eyes burning. No one had ever spoken to her that way. No one. Why did you come here? She whispered. To my room. Because I wanted to meet you, he replied, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. And because I have a habit of trusting my instincts. He stepped away from the balustrade, hands in his pockets, casual but elegant. Rest tonight. Tomorrow, if you'd like, I'd love to show you Valemont. The real Valemont. Not the halls and protocols. The place I love. Barbara nodded, unable to form words. Christopher walked to the door, but before leaving, he stopped and looked back. And Barbara? Yes? Welcome. The door closed softly. Barbara stood still, her heart beating like an uncontrolled drum, her fingers still tingling where he had touched her. Something had just changed. She didn't know what, but she felt it. And for the first time in a long while, Barbara didn't want to disappear. Barbara woke to the sound of soft voices and the smell of Arabic coffee mixed with cardamom. Morning light streamed through the balcony in golden rays, warming the room in a way that felt almost unreal. For a moment she forgot where she was. Then memory came back like a wave. Valemont. Christopher. The touch of his fingers on hers. She sat up in bed, her heart racing. A gentle knock at the door made her jump. Miss Barbara. A woman's voice, kind and formal. May I come in? Yes, of course. The door opened and a young woman entered, carrying a silver tray. She wore elegant traditional clothing, her hair tied back under a blue silk scarf. She smiled warmly. Good morning. I'm Amira. I brought your breakfast. Mr. Valemont asked that you be informed. There's a gathering at the fountain garden in an hour. The other candidates will also be present. Barbara froze. Other candidates? Amira nodded, placing the tray on the small table beside the bed. Yes, miss. 3 other young women have also been invited. It's tradition in Valemont for the heir to meet all the suitors before making his decision. Barbara's stomach dropped. Of course there were others. Why had she thought, even for one ridiculous second, that it would be different? That she would be special? I understand, she murmured, her voice coming out weaker than she intended. Amira hesitated, as if she wanted to say something, but just smiled again and left. Barbara looked at the tray. Fresh breads, exotic fruits, cheeses she'd never seen, but her appetite had vanished. An hour later, she was at the fountain garden, and immediately knew she was completely out of place. The garden was spectacular. Sculpted marble fountains poured crystal-clear water into shallow pools, surrounded by flowers that looked like living jewels. Jasmine trees provided fragrant shade. The sound of the water was soothing, almost hypnotic. But Barbara barely noticed the beauty around her, because there, sitting elegantly on velvet cushions under a white pavilion, were the other 3 candidates. And they were perfect. The first was tall, with bronzed skin and black hair that fell in perfect waves to her waist. She wore an emerald green silk dress that hugged every curve as if it had been painted on her. Her eyes were feline, calculating. She watched Barbara enter and smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. You must be Barbara, she said, her voice melodious but cold. I'm Isabel, from Paris. The second candidate was platinum blonde, with delicate features that resembled antique porcelain. Her blue eyes gleamed like ice under the sun. She wore white, a lace dress that seemed ethereal, almost angelic. When Barbara approached, she tilted her head delicately. Tatiana, she introduced herself with a soft Russian accent. It's a pleasure to meet you. But pleasure wasn't in her voice. It was assessment, cold curiosity. The third was different. Dark-haired, with honey-colored skin and intense brown eyes, she had a presence that filled the space. She wore a vibrant red dress, bold and gold jewelry that tinkled softly when she moved. She didn't smile. She just looked Barbara up and down with an expression that made the verdict clear, not competition. Layla, she said simply. From Cairo. Barbara felt the flush rising up her neck. She wore jeans, simple, faded jeans, and a white cotton blouse. She'd tried to fix her hair, but it remained rebellious, pulled back in a ponytail that was already falling apart. Her glasses slid down her nose and she pushed them back up, nervous. Hi, she managed to say, her voice coming out almost as a whisper. I... I'm Barbara." Isabel exchanged a look with Tatiana, a look that said everything. Layla simply returned her attention to her perfectly painted red nails. "Sit down," Tatiana offered, gesturing to an empty cushion. "We were talking about Valamont's customs. Do you know the history of the region?" Barbara sat down, uncomfortable, her legs crossed awkwardly. "A little," she admitted. "I read about the fusion of tradition and modernity." "Read," Isabel interrupted with a soft laugh. "How adorable. I spent 6 months studying with tutors specialized in Arab culture. I can recite poetry and classical Arabic. And I studied diplomatic etiquette since I was 15, Tatiana added, her voice sweet as sugar. "My family has connections with European royalty. It's important to understand protocol." Layla finally looked up, her gaze fixing on Barbara like a predator assessing prey. "And you, Barbara, what do you bring to this competition?" The word was spoken with subtle disdain, as if competition was being too generous to describe the situation. Barbara opened her mouth, but no words came out. What did she have to offer? Old books? Thrift store clothes? The ability to become invisible in a room full of people? She began, but was interrupted. "Good morning." All four turned around. Christopher was there. He wore traditional clothes today, an impeccable white thobe that contrasted with his tanned skin, a keffiyeh held by a golden agal. He was stunning, regal, powerful. And when he entered the pavilion, it was as if the sun had intensified. Isabel stood immediately, the movement fluid and graceful like a dance. "Mr. Valamont," she purred, bowing slightly. "What an honor." Tatiana followed, her smile angelic and perfect. "We've been looking forward to your arrival." Layla remained seated, but tilted her head with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. Christopher. He nodded to each of them, polite but distant. And then his eyes found Barbara, and something changed. His expression softened. He walked directly to her, extending his hand. "Barbara, did you sleep well?" She blinked, surprised, and accepted his hand. He helped her stand, his fingers wrapping around hers for a second longer than necessary. "Yes, thank you," she murmured. Isabel coughed delicately, the sound loaded with barely disguised irritation. Christopher finally released Barbara's hand and turned to the others. "Thank you for accepting my invitation. Over the next few days, I'll have the opportunity to get to know you better. Valamont isn't just a place of wealth, it's a place of heart, and I need someone who understands that." He paused, his eyes scanning each face. "But before anything else, I want you to feel comfortable. This isn't a test, it's a conversation, a mutual discovery." Isabel took a step forward, her voice soft but strategic. "Perhaps we could start by sharing our visions of leadership. I've prepared some ideas on how to strengthen Valamont's diplomatic relations with—" "Later," Christopher interrupted gently. "Right now, I'd just like to walk through the gardens. Who would like to join me?" All three raised their hands immediately, smiles plastered on their faces. But Christopher looked at Barbara. "Barbara?" She blinked, confused. "Me? You said you like gardens. There's a place I think you'll enjoy seeing." Isabel went rigid. Tatiana lost her angelic smile for a fraction of a second. Layla clenched her teeth. Barbara felt all eyes pinned on her, heavy as daggers. But Christopher waited, his hand extended again, a silent invitation. She took a deep breath and accepted. As they walked together along the stone path, leaving the other three behind, Barbara could feel the weight of their stares burning into her back. She could imagine the whispers, the judgments, the plans being woven. The war had begun, and she didn't even know how to fight. Christopher led her down a path Barbara hadn't seen before. They left the fountain garden behind, passing through archways covered in flowering vines that gave off a sweet, slightly spicy fragrance. The sound of the other candidates disappeared, replaced only by the distant song of birds and the whisper of wind through the leaves. Barbara walked beside him, aware of every movement, every breath. Her fingers nervously played with the hem of her blouse. She didn't know what to say, didn't know how to fill the silence that, strangely, didn't feel uncomfortable. "You're tense," Christopher observed, his voice low, almost amused. Barbara swallowed hard. "Sorry, I'm not good at these things." What things? Socializing, talking, being interesting. He stopped walking and turned to her. His eyes, golden in the light filtered through the trees, studied her face with an intensity that made her heart race. You think you're not interesting? Barbara looked away, unable to hold that penetrating gaze. I know I'm not, especially compared to the others. They're perfect. Perfect. Christopher repeated the word as if tasting it and not liking the flavor. You know what I've learned about perfection, Barbara? She shook her head. That it's exhausting, calculated, and most of the time fake. He took a step closer. Barbara could feel his warmth, the scent of sandalwood mixed with something woody and masculine. Her pulse quickened. Come, he said softly. I want to show you something. They continued walking until they reached an old wooden door, hidden behind a cascade of purple bougainvillea. Christopher opened it, revealing a narrow stone staircase spiraling upward. He gestured for her to go up first. The stairs ended at a private terrace at the top of one of the palace towers. Barbara stepped out and gasped. The view was breathtaking. On one side, the desert stretched infinitely, the dunes painted gold and amber under the morning sun. On the other, the palace gardens spread out like a living mosaic of green and flowers, punctuated by fountains that sparkled like diamonds. And beyond, the modern city of Valemont, glass and steel skyscrapers coexisting harmoniously with ancient minarets and colorful markets. This is where I come when I need to think, Christopher said, leaning against the balustrade. Away from advisors, protocols, expectations, Barbara approached slowly, her fingers touching the stone warmed by the sun. It's beautiful, she whispered. It's real, he corrected. And that's what I'm looking for, Barbara. Reality, not performances. He turned to her, his eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that made her legs tremble. Tell me about you, really. Not what you think I want to hear. What you love, what scares you, what makes you feel alive. Barbara blinked, surprised by the sincerity of the question. No one had ever asked that before, no one cared enough. She began, hesitant. I love books, stories, places that only exist in imagination. When I was a child, I'd hide in the school library because it was the only place where no one bothered me, where I could be someone else. Why did you need to be someone else? The question was gentle, but it pierced deep. Barbara breathed shakily. Because the person I was never enough. My stepmother. She made that very clear. I was the wrong daughter, the ugly one, the leftover. Her voice broke at the end, and she bit her lip, furious with herself for exposing herself like this. But then she felt something warm wrap around her hand. Christopher had intertwined his fingers with hers. The touch was firm, comforting, and sent a current of warmth up her arm. Look at me, he asked gently. She obeyed, her eyes glistening behind her glasses. You're not what your stepmother said you were, he said, each word deliberate, loaded with conviction. You're what I see, and I see someone brave, someone real, someone who makes me want to know more. Barbara felt tears threatening to overflow. She blinked rapidly, trying to hold them back. You barely know me. Then let me know you. His thumb traced small circles on the back of her hand. It was a simple gesture, almost unconscious, but it made every nerve in Barbara's body awaken. Tell me more, he insisted. What else scares you? She laughed weakly, a mixture of humor and despair. This moment, you, everything here. I'm afraid I'll wake up and find out it was just a dream. Or worse, that it's real, but I'll ruin everything. Why do you think you'll ruin it? Because that's what I do. I stumble, fall, say the wrong things. I'm clumsy. With everything. Christopher smiled. It wasn't a mocking smile, but something deeper. Something that lit up his eyes in a way that made Barbara's stomach knot. You know what happened when we met? Barbara frowned. I fell. Literally. You fell, he agreed. And I laughed. Know why? She shook her head. Because it was real. Not rehearsed, not calculated, it was you. And it was the most refreshing thing that's happened to me in years. He moved closer, reducing the space between them. Barbara could feel his breath, warm against her forehead. Her heart was beating so hard, she was sure he could hear it. I've spent my whole life surrounded by people who say what they think I want to hear, Christopher continued, his voice low, intimate. Who perform, who calculate every word, every gesture. It's lonely. His free hand rose slowly, and he brushed away a strand of hair that had escaped from her ponytail, tucking it gently behind her ear. His fingers lingered there, lightly grazing the sensitive skin of her neck. Barbara held her breath. But you, he whispered, you're different, and you don't need to try to be. Their eyes met. The world seemed to shrink to that point, just the two of them, the warm sun, the gentle wind, and something invisible but palpable vibrating in the air between them. Christopher tilted his head slightly, his eyes dropping to her lips for a fraction of a second before returning to her gaze. It was a silent question, an invitation. Barbara felt her body lean instinctively toward him, as if magnetized. But then a sound echoed from downstairs, voices, footsteps, someone calling Christopher's name. The bubble burst. Christopher stepped back, the moment broken, but his fingers still held hers. He sighed, a mixture of frustration and resignation. Duty calls, he said, a sad smile curving his lips. But Barbara... Yes? What's happening between us? It's not just in your head. He squeezed her hand one last time, before releasing it and walking toward the stairs. Before descending, he turned one more time. Have dinner with me tonight, just the two of us. No protocols, no performances, just us. Barbara nodded, unable to form words. He smiled, a real smile, one that lit up his entire face, and disappeared down the stairs. Barbara stood on the terrace, her legs weak, her heart still racing. She touched the place where his fingers had grazed her neck, feeling the skin still tingling. What was happening? How could something so unlikely, so impossible feel so right? She turned to the desert view, the wind blowing against her face, and for the first time in her life, she allowed herself to believe. Believe that maybe, just maybe, she deserved to be seen, deserved to be desired, deserved to be loved. Barbara spent the rest of the day floating. Her feet touched the ground, but she barely felt it. The promise of dinner with Christopher filled every thought, every breath. She'd returned to her room, tried to rest, but sleep was impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face. The way he'd looked at her, touched her hand, brushed that strand of hair away. She got up and walked to the wardrobe, opening it for the 100th time. Her clothes looked even sadder there, hanging among velvet hangers. Faded jeans, simple cotton blouses, a navy blue dress that had seen better days. Nothing was appropriate for dinner with a man like Christopher Valmont. A soft knock at the door made her jump. "Miss Barbara?" It was Amira, the young woman who had brought her breakfast, but this time she wasn't alone. Two other girls accompanied her, carrying elegant boxes wrapped in golden tissue paper. "Mr. Valmont sent this for you," Amira said with a warm smile. "For dinner tonight." Barbara blinked, confused. "He sent this?" Amira nodded and placed the boxes on the bed, opening them carefully. Barbara approached, her heart racing. Inside was the most beautiful dress she'd ever seen. It was a deep blue, almost indigo, the fabric flowing like water through Amira's fingers. The cut was simple but elegant. Modest neckline, thin straps, a skirt that promised to float when walking. There was a delicacy to it, a modesty that somehow made it even more beautiful. "He chose it personally," Amira said softly. "Said this color would match your eyes." Barbara felt the flush rising up her neck. Christopher had chosen this, for her, thinking of her. "There are also shoes," one of the other girls added, revealing a pair of low-heeled sandals, elegant but comfortable. I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Amira smiled, "and let us help you get ready." 2 hours later, Barbara barely recognized the person in the mirror. The dress fit perfectly, hugging her curves in a way that made her feel, for the first time, beautiful. Amira had let her hair down, letting it fall in soft waves over her shoulders. Light makeup highlighted her eyes, the same eyes that had always seemed dull, but now gleamed in a greenish tone, accentuated by the blue of the dress. She still wore her glasses. She'd considered taking them off, but Amira had shaken her head. "He likes them," she'd said simply. "Likes you as you are." Barbara touched the glass of her frames nervously, studying her reflection. Could it be possible that someone like Christopher really wanted her this way? "It's time," Amira announced softly. "Dinner will be served at the Jasmine Pavilion." Barbara took a deep breath, smoothed the dress one more time, and left. The corridor was silent. She followed Amira's instructions, turning left, then right, crossing a garden illuminated by lanterns that looked like floating stars. The scent of jasmine was dense, enveloping, almost intoxicating. But when she turned the corner leading to the pavilion, she stopped abruptly. Voices, coming from the side corridor, voices whispering urgently, loaded with tension. Barbara should have continued, should have ignored them, but something in the intensity of those voices made her hesitate. "Are you sure it'll work?" It was Tatiana's voice, usually angelic, now sharp as glass. "Of course it will," Isabel replied, impatient. "The bracelet is hidden in her room. When it's discovered, she'll be exposed as a thief. Christopher will have no choice but to send her away." Barbara felt her blood run cold. What if someone finds out it was us? Layla's voice, usually confident, now loaded with doubt. "No one will find out," Isabel cut her off. "We were careful. And besides, who are they going to believe? Us three women from respectable families? Or her, the little nobody who showed up out of nowhere?" Low, cruel laughter. Barbara stepped back, her hand covering her mouth to muffle the sound of her trembling breath. They'd set her up, planted something in her room, and Christopher. Oh God, Christopher was going to think she was a thief. She turned, ready to run back to her room, to find the bracelet, to prove her innocence. But her feet tangled in her own dress. She stumbled, her hand hitting the stone wall with a sound that echoed through the corridor. The voices stopped abruptly. "Is someone there?" Tatiana called, her voice sweet again now, but Barbara could hear the tension underneath. She didn't wait. She ran. Her feet barely touched the ground, her heart pounding so loud she could barely hear her own footsteps. She needed to get to her room, needed to find the bracelet, needed to... Barbara? She collided directly with something solid and warm. Strong hands caught her by the shoulders, keeping her from falling. Christopher. He was dressed more formally, a dark suit that highlighted his broad shoulders, the white shirt contrasting with his tanned skin. But the concern in his eyes was naked, intense. "What happened?" he asked, his hands still holding her. "You're shaking." Barbara opened her mouth, but no words came out. How could she explain? How would he believe her against three perfect, polished, prepared women? "Barbara," Christopher repeated, more urgent now. "Talk to me." Her voice failed. "They set me up. A bracelet. In my room. They're going to say I stole it." His eyes narrowed, not with suspicion, but with anger. "Who?" "Isabel, Tatiana, and Layla. I heard them talking. They want to frame me." For a moment, Christopher was absolutely still. Then his jaw tightened. "Come with me." He took her hand, firm, protective, and began walking quickly down the corridor. Barbara almost had to run to keep up with him. They crossed gardens, climbed stairs, until they reached a room she'd never seen before. It was an office, elegant but functional, dominated by an enormous dark wood desk. Christopher released her hand only to pick up a phone. "Rashid," he said, his voice cutting. "Gather security and go to Miss Barbara's room. There's a bracelet hidden there. Find it. And then, I want security cameras reviewed, all footage from the corridors near her room in the last 24 hours. He hung up and turned to Barbara. "I already knew," he said simply. Barbara blinked. "What?" "That they were planning something. My security team alerted me about suspicious conversations. I was waiting to see how far they'd go." He took a step toward her, his eyes softening. "But I never, not for a second, believed you'd done anything wrong." How can you be so sure?" Christopher raised his hand, touching her face with a gentleness that contrasted with the anger still vibrating in his body. "Because I see you, Barbara. Really. And I know what's in your heart." Tears burned in her eyes. She blinked rapidly, but one escaped, sliding down her cheek. Christopher wiped it away with his thumb, the touch sending shivers down her spine. "Will they be punished?" "They'll be expelled," he replied, his voice hard. "Before dawn. I don't tolerate betrayal. I don't tolerate cruelty, and I certainly don't tolerate anyone hurting you." The intensity in his voice made something contract in Barbara's chest. He wasn't just protecting a guest, he was protecting her, specifically, fiercely. "Christopher," she began, but he shook his head. "No. Let me say what I need to say." He held both her hands, intertwining their fingers. "Since you arrived, everything changed. You make me laugh, make me think, make me want to be better. And I'm not going to let anyone take that away from me, from us." Her heart was beating so hard it hurt. "But what if I'm not enough? What if I disappoint you?" "Impossible," he said immediately, "because you're already more than I expected. You're real, Barbara, and that's everything." He pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her in an embrace that was both protective and intimate. Barbara sank into him, feeling his warmth, the scent of sandalwood, the strong beating of his heart against hers. "Still want to have dinner with me?" he murmured against her hair. Barbara laughed, a trembling, relieved sound. "Yes, then let's go. Because I spent all day waiting to have you all to myself." He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes, and in that look, Barbara saw promise, protection, and something deeper she was still afraid to name. Dinner was magical. The Jasmine Pavilion was small, intimate, lit only by floating candles in small glass vessels that reflected golden light on the white walls. The table was set for two, fine porcelain plates, crystal glasses, and in the center, a delicate arrangement of white roses and jasmine that perfumed the air with an almost hypnotic sweetness. Christopher pulled out Barbara's chair, the gesture chivalrous but natural, as if it were nothing. But to her, it was everything. Every small act of consideration, every lingering look, every smile. It all accumulated inside her like light filling a space that had always been dark. They talked for hours, about books they loved, about childhood so different but equally lonely, about hidden dreams and fears confessed only in darkness. Christopher talked about the pressure of being an heir, of carrying expectations so heavy that sometimes he forgot how to breathe without purpose. Barbara talked about being invisible, about wanting to be seen but being so afraid when she finally was. And at some point between the second and third course, their hands met across the table, fingers intertwined, natural, right. When dinner ended, Christopher walked her back to her room. They walked slowly, neither wanting the night to end. At the door, he held both her hands, his thumbs tracing slow circles on the backs of her hands. "Thank you," he said softly, "for being you. For reminding me what's real." Barbara smiled, her heart so full it hurt. "Thank you for seeing me." He leaned in, pressed a soft kiss to her forehead, chaste but loaded with promise, and stepped back. "Sleep well, Barbara." She floated into her room, closing the door behind her and leaning against it, eyes closed, a silly smile on her face. That's when she saw it. An envelope. White, simple, placed carefully on the nightstand. Her name was written on the front in handwriting she would recognize anywhere. Her stomach dropped. With trembling hands, Barbara picked up the envelope and opened it. Inside, a single sheet of paper, and as her eyes scanned the words, the world around her began to crumble. "Barbara, I hope you're enjoying your little fantasy in Valemont. It must be comforting to play princess when your whole life you've been nothing but dead weight. But let's get down to business. You're there for a reason. Our reason. Christopher Valemont is a man rich beyond imagination, and you, dear stepdaughter, are going to make sure we get our fair share. Here's what you're going to do. Seduce him. Use whatever you have, and frankly, it's not much, to convince him to marry you. Once the marriage is official, you'll arrange a transfer of $20 million to our account. Consider it a brokerage fee. After all, it was our generosity that put you there. If you refuse, or if you try to expose us, rest assured that all important figures in Valemont will receive carefully documented evidence of your fraudulent intentions. Photos of you planning this with us before the trip, falsified emails, paid witnesses. We'll destroy any chance you think you have. You've always been easily manipulated, Barbara. Don't disappoint now. Victoria. The letter fell from Barbara's fingers, floating to the floor like something dirty, contaminated. She backed up to the bed, sitting heavily, her breath coming in short, painful gasps. 20 million. blackmail, corruption, and Christopher. God, if he found out that her family had sent her with this vile purpose, he would never believe she was innocent. How could he? The evidence would all be there, fabricated but convincing. Barbara pressed her hands against her face, trying to contain the panic rising like a wave. She needed to leave. Needed to go before Victoria carried out her threat, before Christopher saw her as the fraud Victoria would paint her to be. But the thought of leaving this place, of leaving him, was like a blade through her chest. She'd started to believe that she deserved kindness, that she deserved to be seen, loved. But maybe Victoria was right. Maybe she was always destined to be used, discarded, forgotten. The tears came then, hot and silent, sliding down her cheeks. She didn't try to stop them. Just let them come, hugging her own knees, feeling small again, invisible again. The following days were torture. Barbara avoided Christopher. When he appeared in the gardens, she hid behind columns. When he sent invitations for walks, she made excuses through a mirror. At formal dinners with advisors, yes, the other candidates had been expelled, leaving only her, Barbara sat in silence, responding only when directly questioned. Christopher noticed. Of course he noticed. His eyes followed her constantly, confused, worried. He tried to start conversations, but she deflected. He tried to touch her hand, but she pulled away, and every time she did, something in him broke a little more. She could see it, and it killed her. But what could she do? Tell the truth and risk Victoria carrying out her threat? Stay and allow him to be dragged into her family's filth? On the 5th night, Barbara was on her room's balcony, looking out at the desert under the moonlight, when she heard the door open behind her. She turned. Christopher was there. He hadn't knocked, hadn't waited for permission. He simply entered, closed the door behind him, and walked straight to her with a determination that made her heart race. "Enough," he said, his voice low but firm. "Enough avoiding, enough excuses." "What happened?" Barbara shook her head, unable to speak. "Barbara," he insisted, taking another step. "I feel like you're here, but at the same time, millions of miles away. And it's destroying me. Please talk to me." "I can't," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Why not?" "Because if I tell you, you'll hate me." Christopher stopped, his eyes widening slightly. "Hate you? Barbara, there's nothing you could say that would make me hate you." "There is," she insisted, tears burning again. "There is. My family, they sent me here to use you, to steal from you." She grabbed the letter from the nightstand with trembling hands and held it out to him. Christopher took it, his eyes scanning the words. Barbara watched his expression change, confusion, anger, and then something softer. He folded the letter carefully and set it aside. Then he walked to her slowly, deliberately. "You think I didn't know?" Barbara blinked. "What?" "Your family, Barbara. I investigated everything from the beginning. I know about Victoria. I know about the debts, the corruption, the schemes. I know they would try to use you." She stared at him, stunned. "You knew?" "Yes." "Then why did you let me stay?" Christopher took the final step, closing the distance between them. His hands rose, framing her face, his thumbs wiping away the tears streaming down. "Because I don't care what they are. I care what you are. And you, Barbara, are nothing like what they said. You're everything I always wanted and never thought I'd find. But they'll come after you. They'll try to destroy—" "Let them try," he interrupted, his voice firm. "I have resources. I have power. And I'll use every ounce of it to protect you. But you need to trust me. You need to stop carrying this alone." Barbara sobbed, the sound torn from relief and pain mixed together. "I believe in you," Christopher whispered, his forehead resting against hers. "I see you. I choose you. And nothing your family does will change that." She collapsed against him, her arms wrapping around his waist, her face pressed against his chest. He held her tightly, one hand sliding down her back in slow, soothing movements. "Never hide from me again," he murmured against her hair. "Never again, promise." "I promise," she whispered back. And in that embrace, in his warmth, in the safety of his arms, Barbara finally let the fear go, because for the first time, She wasn't alone. The next morning, Christopher appeared at Barbara's door before the sun had fully risen. He wore simple clothes, a beige linen shirt, dark pants, a scarf loosely wrapped around his neck, and carried a backpack. His eyes gleamed with something Barbara couldn't name. Excitement, mystery, promise. "Wear something comfortable," he said, a smile playing on his lips. "We're going out." Barbara blinked, still half asleep. "Out? Where?" "Away. Just the two of us. No palace, no advisors, no protocols. Just us." Half an hour later, they were in a sturdy jeep, crossing discreet gates at the back of the palace. The city of Valemont quickly disappeared in the rearview mirror, replaced by golden dunes stretching infinitely under the brightening sky. The air was cool, almost cold, but Barbara knew the heat would come soon. Christopher drove with one hand relaxed on the wheel, the other resting casually between them. So close Barbara could feel the warmth radiating from it. She watched his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the way his eyes narrowed slightly against the rising sun, the small smile that never seemed to completely disappear when he was near her. "Where are we going?" she finally asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "To a place no one else knows," he replied. "My refuge, where I go when the world gets too heavy." They drove for almost 2 hours, the desert changing around them, from smooth dunes to dramatic rock formations, from golden sand to shades of red and orange. Eventually, Christopher stopped the jeep at the foot of a small canyon hidden among ancient rocks. "We're here," Barbara climbed out, shielding her eyes from the sun that now shone intensely. Christopher grabbed the backpack and began walking along a narrow trail between the rocks. She followed, curious, her heart beating with anticipation. The trail opened into a protected clearing. There was a spring, crystal clear water bubbling from the rocks and forming a small shallow pool. Palm trees provided shade, and the sound of the water was almost magical, breaking the vast silence of the desert. In the center of the clearing were the remains of an old fire pit and some stones arranged as seats. "Christopher," Barbara whispered, turning slowly. "This is incredible." "I used to come here as a child," he said, putting the backpack down. "When my father was too busy being a leader and forgot to be a father, here I could just be me." He turned to her, and there was something vulnerable in his eyes. "And now I want to share this with you." They spent the day exploring. Christopher showed her how to find signs of life in the desert, animal tracks hidden in the sand, hardy plants clinging to cracks in the rocks. They hiked to a high point where they could see the dunes stretching out like a frozen ocean. They sat side by side on a sun-warmed rock, shoulders touching, and simply watched the world in silence. When the sun began to set, Christopher lit a fire. The flames danced against the darkening sky, sending golden sparks into the air. He pulled food from the backpack, bread, cheese, fruit, a bottle of wine, and they ate sitting near the fire, their knees almost touching. "Can I ask you something?" Barbara asked softly, breaking the comfortable silence. "Anything. Why did you choose me? Really, you could have anyone, someone perfect, someone prepared for this." Christopher set aside his piece of bread, his eyes fixed on the flames for a moment before turning to her. "Because perfection is lonely, Barbara. It's cold. I've spent my whole life surrounded by perfect people who felt nothing real, and then you showed up, tripping over your own feet, with your crooked glasses and your simple clothes, and you made me laugh, really laugh, for the first time in years." He moved closer, his voice dropping to something intimate, vulnerable. "You made me feel, and I didn't know how starved I was for that until I met you." Barbara felt the air leave her lungs. The way he looked at her, as if she were precious, desired, essential, made her entire body vibrate. "I'm afraid," she confessed, her voice trembling, "of not being enough, of waking up one day and you realizing you deserve more." Christopher shook his head slowly, his hand rising to touch her face. His fingers traced the line of her jaw, slid down her neck, came to rest over her racing pulse. "You already are more," he whispered. "You're everything." The world shrank to that moment. The fire crackled, the desert whispered, and between them something invisible but palpable pulsed. Desire, connection, need. Christopher leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull back. But Barbara didn't pull back. Instead, she closed her eyes and leaned in too. Their lips met, The kiss was soft at first, tentative, exploring. But then something ignited. Christopher deepened the kiss, his hand sliding to the nape of her neck, fingers tangling in her hair. Barbara gasped against his mouth, her own hands rising to grip his shirt, pulling him closer. The kiss grew more intense, urgent. Years of loneliness, of being ignored, of invisibility, all melted under his touch. Barbara felt seen, desired, alive. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. Christopher rested his forehead against hers, eyes closed, a small smile curving his lips. "I've waited so long for you," he murmured. Barbara laughed softly, a trembling but happy sound. "I didn't even know you existed. And now I can't imagine my life without you." He pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her. She fit against him perfectly, her head resting on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Stars began to appear above them, millions of points of light piercing the dark veil of the sky. "Stay with me tonight," Christopher said softly. "Here, under the stars, just the two of us." Barbara nodded against his chest. Yes. He'd brought a tent, simple but comfortable. They set it up together, laughing when it nearly collapsed twice. Inside, there were soft blankets and pillows. It felt like its own world, isolated from everything. They lay side by side, fingers intertwined between them, looking up at the tent ceiling where the firelight cast dancing shadows. "Christopher?" Barbara whispered. "Yes? Thank you. For bringing me here. For seeing me." He rolled onto his side, facing her. His free hand rose, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Don't thank me. This is what I always wanted. You are what I always wanted." Their eyes met, and in that look was promise, desire, future. Christopher leaned in, capturing her lips again in a kiss that was both sweet and full of hunger. Barbara melted into him, feeling every barrier she'd built over the years crumble. They stayed like that, lost in each other, while the desert kept their secrets and the stars witnessed the birth of something rare, something true, something that couldn't be destroyed. The fire outside had reduced to pulsing embers, casting a soft golden glow through the tent opening. The desert was silent, a deep, ancient silence, broken only by the occasional whisper of wind between the rocks and the faint crackling of dying coals. Inside the tent, the world had shrunk to just the two of them. Christopher was propped on one elbow, looking at Barbara as if memorizing every detail of her face. The dim light danced over his features, softening the angles, making his eyes even deeper. His free hand traced slow patterns on her arm, from shoulder to wrist and back, a touch so light it barely grazed the skin, but sent waves of warmth through her body. "You're thinking out loud," Barbara whispered, a small smile curving her lips. "I'm thinking about how I got here," Christopher replied, his voice husky, intimate. "How I spent my whole life searching without knowing what I was looking for. And then you appeared. And suddenly everything made sense." He leaned in, pressing a soft kiss to the corner of her mouth, then another on her cheek, on her temple, as if savoring every inch. Barbara closed her eyes, her breathing becoming irregular. Each touch from him ignited something inside her, something she didn't even know existed. Desire, need, the overwhelming sensation of being wanted. "Christopher," she whispered, barely recognizing her own voice. "Tell me what you need, Barbara," he murmured against her skin, his lips grazing her neck now. "Tell me what you want." She opened her eyes, meeting his, and in those eyes was fire, restraint. He was holding back, waiting for her, giving her control. "You," she said simply. "I want you." Something changed in him. The restraint broke, replaced by something primal, necessary. He pulled her closer, his hands sliding to her waist, holding her firmly as he kissed her deeply. This kiss was different from the previous ones. It wasn't exploratory, it was claiming, hungry. His mouth moved over hers with an intensity that made Barbara's toes curl. She responded with equal fervor, her hands rising to tangle in his hair, pulling him even closer, as if there was no distance close enough. Christopher rolled, placing her gently on her back, his body hovering over hers. He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice taut with control. If you want to stop at any time—" "I don't want to stop," Barbara interrupted, her voice firm despite her racing heart. "I want you, Christopher. Completely." He closed his eyes for a moment, as if absorbing those words. Then he opened them, and what she saw there left her breathless. Reverence, desire, love. His hands found the buttons of her blouse, undoing them slowly, one by one. Each movement was deliberate, careful, as if she were something sacred. When the blouse finally opened, he slid it off her shoulders, exposing pale skin that had never seen the desert sun. "You're beautiful," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Barbara felt tears burning in her eyes. No one had ever said that. No one had ever looked at her like this. Christopher bowed his head, pressing kisses along her collarbone, down her shoulder, along the curve of her neck. Each touch of his lips left a trail of fire. Barbara arched against him, a low moan escaping her throat. "Christopher!" she gasped, her fingers gripping his shoulders. He raised his head, his eyes meeting hers again. Then, with slow, deliberate movements, he removed his own shirt. The dim light from the embers highlighted every muscle, every line of his torso. Barbara reached out, hesitant, and when her fingers touched his warm skin, he shuddered. "Touch me," he murmured. "Please." She obeyed, her hands exploring the expanse of his shoulders, sliding down his chest, feeling his heart beating as hard as hers. He was warm, solid, real, and he was hers. Christopher lowered himself again, capturing her mouth in a kiss that stole all the air from her lungs. His hands explored now, sliding down her ribs, along the curve of her waist, over her hips. Each touch was both gentle and possessive, as if he were memorizing every curve, every sigh. The remaining clothing disappeared slowly, carefully, until there was nothing left between them. Skin against skin, heat against heat. Christopher paused again, looking deep into her eyes. "I've waited my whole life to find you," he said, his voice breaking slightly with emotion. Barbara touched his face, her thumb tracing the line of his jaw. "And I didn't even know I was waiting for you," she whispered back. "But now that I've found you, I don't want to let you go. Ever." He moved then, and Barbara gasped as their bodies finally joined. There was a moment of adjustment, of discovery, and then completeness, as if two pieces that were always meant to fit together had finally found their place. Christopher moved slowly, carefully, his eyes never leaving her face, watching every reaction, every sigh. Barbara moved with him, her hands sliding down his back, feeling the muscles contracting under her palms. The rhythm gradually increased. Breaths became shorter. Moans mixed in the warm air of the tent. Barbara felt consumed, not just by physical pleasure, but by the emotional connection that vibrated between them like something alive. "Barbara!" Christopher gasped against her neck, his lips grazing the sensitive skin. "You're everything." She responded with a moan, her fingers digging into his shoulders as waves of sensation washed through her. The world reduced to this moment, to his warmth, to the sound of intertwined breaths, to the feeling of being completely lost and completely found at the same time. When climax came, it was devastating. Barbara arched against him, a silent cry trapped in her throat as her body shattered into millions of fragments of light. Christopher followed moments later, his body trembling, his face buried in the curve of her neck as he murmured her name like a prayer. They stayed like that for long moments, intertwined, hearts beating so close it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. Eventually, Christopher rolled to the side, but immediately pulled her against him, his arms wrapping around her with protective firmness. Barbara rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart slowly returning to normal. His hand slid slowly down her back, up and down, in a soothing, comforting rhythm. "Stay with me," he whispered against her hair. "Not just tonight, forever." Barbara lifted her head, looking into his eyes, and what she saw there left her speechless. It wasn't just desire. It was commitment. It was future. "Yes," she whispered, tears finally overflowing. "Yes." He smiled, that smile that lit up his entire face, and kissed her again. Soft this time, sweet, a sealed promise. They settled together under the blankets, bodies still intertwined, refusing to create any distance. Through the tent opening, the stars shone like silent witnesses. The desert kept their secrets. And there, amid the ancient and eternal vastness, two lonely souls finally found their home. In each other. Barbara woke before dawn, her body still warmed by Christopher's heat as he slept deeply beside her. She watched him in the semi-darkness, the way his eyelashes cast delicate shadows on his cheeks, how his lips were slightly parted, the peaceful expression she rarely saw when he was awake, always carrying the weight of his responsibilities. He looked younger like this, vulnerable, completely hers, and that was exactly why she needed to leave. Barbara slipped carefully from his arms, each movement deliberate to avoid waking him. The morning air was cold against her bare skin, making her shiver as she searched for her clothes scattered around the tent. She dressed in silence, her hands trembling, not from cold, but from the enormity of what she was about to do. She knew Christopher had said he would protect her, that he would face Victoria and all the filth she tried to throw. But Barbara also knew something he, in his kindness, refused to see. Associations have consequences. And she, with her corrupt family and their poisonous threats, was a stain that would eventually tarnish everything he had built. Vallemont deserved better. Christopher deserved better. She wrote a note, the words coming out blurred through tears she refused to let fall. She folded it carefully and placed it where her glasses always rested, beside the makeshift bed. He would understand the symbolism, the glasses he said he loved, the part of her he had learned to see. Leaving them was leaving her heart. Barbara looked at Christopher one last time. He murmured something in his sleep, his hand reaching out instinctively for the empty space where she should be. The pain that shot through her chest was physical, sharp, almost unbearable. "I love you," she whispered silently, knowing she would never have the courage to say it out loud. "And that's why I'm leaving." She left the tent and began to walk. The desert at dawn was both beautiful and merciless. The sky was painted in shades of purple and pink, the stars still visible but slowly disappearing. The sand was cold under her feet, and she had no idea where she was going. She only knew she needed to get away, needed to put distance between herself and the temptation to go back, to wake him, to be selfish and stay. She walked for hours. The sun rose, transforming the desert into liquid fire. The heat increased rapidly, brutal and merciless. Barbara removed the jacket she'd brought, then her long-sleeved shirt, leaving only a thin t-shirt. Her lips cracked, her throat burned. But she continued. Because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant regret. That's when the wind began. At first it was just a breeze lifting small clouds of sand, but it quickly intensified, transforming into something fierce, alive. The sky darkened as if someone had drawn a curtain. Sand began to whip her face, her arms, getting in her eyes and mouth. A sandstorm. Barbara tried to protect herself, covering her face with her arms, but the wind was relentless. She couldn't see, couldn't breathe. The world had become a chaotic whirlwind of sand and deafening sound. She fell to her knees, then to her side, curling into a ball as the storm raged around her. Fragmented thoughts crossed her mind. Christopher waking and finding her gone. The pain in his eyes. The desperate search. "I'm sorry," she thought, as consciousness began to slip away. "Sorry, sorry, sorry." And then everything went dark. Christopher woke to the cold. Not the cold of the desert morning, but the cold of absence. He reached out instinctively, searching for Barbara, and found only empty space. His eyes opened immediately, alert. "Barbara?" Silence. He sat up, looking around the tent. Her clothes were gone. The backpack he'd brought for her was open, some things missing. And then he saw it. The glasses, carefully placed beside a folded note. His hands trembled as he picked up the paper and opened it. "Christopher, forgive me for doing this in the most cowardly way possible, but if I stayed, if you asked me to stay, I wouldn't have the strength to refuse, and that would be wrong. You deserve someone who brings light to your life, not shadows. My family is poison. They'll keep trying to use me, trying to hurt you through me. And I can't, won't, be the reason everything you've built is tarnished. You gave me the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. You made me feel seen, loved, real, and I'll carry that with me forever. But now I need to go. For you, because I love you too much to stay. Always yours, Barbara. Christopher read the letter 3 times, each word piercing deeper. Then something inside him broke, not from sadness, but from fury. Fury at Victoria, at the situation, at Barbara for thinking she needed to carry this alone. He burst from the tent like a tornado, eyes scanning the horizon. Footprints. There were footprints in the sand, leading into the open desert. "No," he whispered, his heart plummeting. "No, no, no." He looked at the sky. It was darkening on the horizon, sand clouds forming. A storm was coming, and Barbara was out there, alone, without protection. Christopher wasted no time. He grabbed water, a scarf to cover his face, and began to run. The footprints were clear at first, but as the wind increased, they began to disappear, swallowed by the moving sand. "Barbara!" he shouted, his voice carried away by the growing wind. "Barbara!" The storm hit with full force. Sand whipped from all sides, reducing visibility to almost zero. Christopher covered his face with the scarf, forcing himself to continue. Every step was a battle against the wind, trying to push him back. But he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Because the thought of losing her, of arriving too late, was unbearable. Barbara! And then he saw her. A form curled in the sand, half buried, completely still. His heart stopped. He ran, falling to his knees beside her, his hands trembling as he carefully turned her over. Her face was pale, lips cracked, covered in sand. "Barbara," he whispered, his voice breaking. "No, please no." He pressed his fingers against her neck, searching for a pulse. For one terrible second, he found nothing. Then, weak but there, he felt a beat. Relief flooded his body with such force he nearly collapsed. He lifted her in his arms, her body too light, frighteningly fragile, and began the walk back. The storm still raged, but Christopher barely felt it. His only awareness was her weight in his arms, the faint beating against his chest. "Stay with me," he murmured against her hair. "Please, stay with me. Don't leave me. Not like this." It took forever, but finally he saw the tent through the sand fog. He stumbled in, placing her gently on the blankets. He grabbed water, wetting her lips carefully, cleaning the sand from her face. "Come on, Barbara," he whispered, his voice desperate. "Open your eyes, please." Her eyes opened slowly, disoriented, confused. Then they focused on him. "Christopher." Her voice was hoarse, barely audible. He let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and pulled her into a tight embrace. "You're impossible," he said against her hair, his hands shaking as he held her. "Completely impossible. You think you can just leave? That you can leave me?" Barbara began to cry, sobs shaking her body. "I was trying to protect you." "No." Christopher pulled her back just enough to look into her eyes. "No. You don't protect someone you love by leaving. You stay. You fight. You face it together." Tears were streaming down his face now too. "Never again," he said, his voice firm despite the tears. "Never leave without me again. Never try to carry this alone again. Promise? Barbara, promise." She nodded, unable to speak through the sobs. "Say it," he insisted. "I promise," she finally whispered. He pulled her back into his arms, holding her as if holding his own life, because he was. She was everything, and he would never let her forget that again. 3 days later, Barbara stood before an enormous mirror in her quarters, barely recognizing the woman looking back. The sandstorm had left its marks. Her skin was slightly sunburned, her lips still cracked, but there was something different in her eyes, something that had nothing to do with physical appearance. She looked solid, real, present. Amira adjusted the dress carefully, smoothing invisible creases. It was simple but stunning. Ivory silk that flowed like water, delicate embroidery and silver threads along the neckline and hem. Nothing ostentatious, nothing that screamed for attention, but somehow it was perfect. "You look beautiful, Miss Barbara," Amira said softly. her eyes shining with unshed tears. Barbara touched the fabric nervously. "I still can't believe this is happening." "Believe it," Amira smiled. "Mr. Valemont has made it very clear. Today, before the entire council and all of Valemont, he's going to make his choice. And we all know who he's going to choose. But Barbara knew it wouldn't be that simple. The Valemont Council hadn't approved. Elder advisors, powerful figures with decades of influence, had openly opposed the idea of Christopher marrying her. A woman with no lineage, no connections, with a family stained by scandal. Heated meetings had happened behind closed doors. Raised voices echoed through the corridors. Christopher had faced them all, alone, unyielding, and today would be the day when everything would be decided. The great hall of Valemont was packed. Advisors in formal traditional clothing occupied the elevated seats. Important citizens of the region, business leaders, diplomats from neighboring countries, all present to witness the heir's decision. The atmosphere was thick, loaded with expectation and judgment. Barbara entered quietly, guided by Rashid to a discreet seat on the side. She shouldn't be at the center, not yet, not until Christopher made his announcement. She watched as he entered. Christopher wore full traditional attire, an impeccable white thobe, a black and gold bisht over his shoulders, the keffiyeh held by a golden agal. He looked every inch the leader he was, powerful, commanding. But when his eyes found hers across the crowded hall, she saw the man behind the position, the man who had held her during the storm, who had cried with her, who had loved her. He took his place at the elevated podium, looking out at the crowd. Silence fell like a heavy curtain. "Thank you for coming," Christopher began, his voice firm, clear, echoing off the stone walls. "I know many of you have doubts about the decision I'm about to announce, and I respect that. But before I speak about my future, I need to speak about Valemont's past." He paused, his eyes scanning the faces. "My grandfather built Valemont on two pillars, tradition and innovation. He believed we didn't need to choose between honoring our past and embracing our future. We could do both. But there's a third pillar he valued above all else. Integrity." Murmurs crossed the hall. "Integrity," Christopher repeated. "Not just in business or politics, but in how we treat people, in who we choose to become when no one is watching." He turned, looking directly at the elder advisors. "Some of you believe I should marry someone from a powerful family. Someone with connections that bring political advantage. Someone who looks good at diplomatic dinners." His voice grew harder. "But you're asking me to choose appearance over substance, strategy over heart, and that goes against everything Valemont stands for." One of the elder advisors stood, his voice thundering. "Mr. Valemont, with all due respect, the woman you've chosen comes from a corrupt family. Blackmail, fraud, unpaid debts. How can we trust she's not part of it?" Christopher didn't look away. "Advisor Khalid, do you know my history?" The man blinked, confused. "I do, of course." "Then you know my own uncle tried to steal funds from Valemont 10 years ago, that he was exposed, tried and banished. Does that make me corrupt by association?" Silence. "The woman I chose," Christopher continued, his voice softening, "is not responsible for her family's sins. She's their victim. And instead of becoming like them, she chose to be different. She chose kindness when treated with cruelty, chose honesty when surrounded by lies, and when her family tried to use her as a tool, she came to me and confessed everything, even knowing she could lose everything." He descended from the podium, walking slowly toward Barbara. All eyes followed. "Barbara," he said, extending his hand, "come here, please." Barbara hesitated, her heart beating so hard she could barely hear. But then she stood, her legs trembling, and walked to him. When she placed her hand in his, he held it firmly, like an anchor. Christopher turned to the hall, keeping her hand in his. "Barbara isn't what you expected," he said clearly. "She's what I needed. She taught me what it means to truly love, not to perform love, not to negotiate love, but to choose someone every day, even when it's hard." He looked at her, and the entire hall disappeared. It was just the two of them. "You saw me when I was hiding behind titles and responsibilities, and I saw you when everyone ignored you. And that's more valuable than any political connection. Tears slid down Barbara's face now, freely, without shame. Christopher turned to the council. "If you can't accept my choice, then accept my resignation. Because I won't lead Valemont if it means betraying my heart. If it means abandoning the only person who made me remember what it is to be human." The hall exploded in murmurs. Advisors looked at each other, shocked. But then, something unexpected happened. A young advisor stood up, then another and another. They began to applaud, not everyone. Some remained seated, faces closed in disapproval. But slowly, most of the hall stood. The applause grew, echoing off the ancient walls. Advisor Khalid stood last, his face grave but respectful. "Mr. Valemont," he said, his voice carrying through the hall, "you've reminded us why we follow you, not because of tradition, but because of integrity." He bowed his head. "You have our blessing." The wedding took place 3 days later at sunset, not in the Great Hall but in the desert, where it had all begun. A white and gold pavilion had been erected among the dunes, its curtains floating gently in the warm breeze. Hanging lanterns created a soft, magical glow. Rose petals covered the sand, forming a delicate path. It was small, intimate. Only people who truly mattered. Barbara walked barefoot through the sand, the wedding dress simple but stunning, white silk with delicate embroidery that captured the sunset light. Her hair was loose, jasmine flowers woven through the curls, and waiting for her at the end of the petal path was Christopher. He smiled when he saw her, that smile that lit up his entire face, that made his eyes shine. And Barbara felt something inside her settle, peace, completeness. When she reached him, Christopher held both her hands. "Ready?" he whispered. "More than ever," she whispered back. The officiant spoke about commitment, about choosing each other, about building a life together. But Barbara barely heard. She was lost in Christopher's eyes, in the way he looked at her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. And then it was time for vows. Christopher took a deep breath. "Barbara, I promise to always see you, as you are, not as the world wants you to be. I promise to protect your heart as I protect my own. I promise to remind you every day that you are loved, that you are seen, that you are enough, because you taught me what real love is. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life showing you what that means." Tears flowed freely down Barbara's face now. She held his hands tighter. "Christopher, I promise to be brave. I promise not to run when things get hard. I promise to trust you, us, everything we've built. You taught me I don't need to be perfect to be loved. I just need to be real. And I promise to always be real with you." The officiant smiled. "Then, by the power vested in me, I declare you husband and wife." Christopher didn't wait. He pulled Barbara into a kiss that stole the air from her lungs, a kiss full of promise, of future, of eternal love. The small group of guests applauded, but they barely heard. When they finally pulled apart, Christopher rested his forehead against hers. "My wife," he whispered. "My husband," she whispered back. 1 year later, Barbara held a small child in her arms. A girl with big, curious eyes, soft, dark hair. They were on the same terrace where Christopher had taken her that first day, looking out at the desert stretching infinitely. Christopher appeared behind them, his arms wrapping around both. "How are my girls?" Barbara leaned against him, feeling his solidity, his warmth. "Perfect," little Hope gurgled, her tiny fingers reaching for her father's face. Christopher laughed, kissing her forehead. "She's going to change the world," he said softly, "like her mother changed mine." Barbara turned her head, looking at him. "You changed mine too. Made me believe I deserved to be loved." "You always deserved it," Christopher replied, kissing her softly. "I was just lucky enough to be the one to show you." They stayed like that, the three of them, as the sun set over Valemont. A family born from impossibility, from rejection transformed into love, from invisibility transformed into light. And somewhere in the warm desert wind was the promise that stories like theirs, stories of imperfect people choosing real love, would always find their happy ending. Because sometimes being seen is all someone needs to flourish. Barbara never imagined that being sent as a joke would become the greatest gift of her life. She learned that true love doesn't require perfection. It requires courage. Courage to be seen. Courage to believe you deserve kindness. And Christopher learned that power without heart is empty, but heart with integrity, that changes entire kingdoms. Together, they proved that sometimes what the world rejects is exactly what the heart recognizes as destiny. That invisibility can be transformed into light, and that choosing someone every day is the most revolutionary act of all, because in the end, sometimes all someone needs is to be seen. And maybe deep down, this story is also about us. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, leave a like and become a member to get early access to upcoming stories. And if you felt it was really worth listening to, also click the "Totally Worth It" button. Your gesture makes all the difference and helps us keep bringing stories that move people.